Welcome, folks. I'm your host, Prabal Gupta, and you are listening to The Capital Analyst. Our guest today is Mr. Abhineet Kulkarni. Abhineet is the founder of Tequity Investing, a SEBI registered investment advisory firm that assists individuals and institutions to plan their investments in a disciplined manner. Abhineet worked as a consultant at EY and Infosys, and his last stint was as an independent consultant for a large family business. Post this, Abhineet has also been managing two successful small cases, namely the Middle Class Businessman and Momentum Bull. Join in as he shares his investment philosophy and discusses his investment ideas with us. Welcome to the show, Abhineet. How are you?
Thank you, Prabal. I am doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So let's dig right into the story behind equity investing. So you had been working as a consultant for quite some time. So what made you take the switch from a consulting job to starting your own entrepreneurial venture, that too based in investing? And walk us through this journey.
Right. So, firstly, thank you for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to present this journey. So, as you know, as an employee, most of us, not most of us, but quite a lot of us have this, I would say, desire or this, a feeling that we should have something independent of ourselves, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. Like, some people have it, some people don't have it. So I was one of the people who always had it, that I should be having something independent, some independent setup by myself, right? And while working in EY, I learned quite of things in finance. All right. And I always had this inclination towards investments. Okay. So parallelly, I was always maintaining a portfolio for myself and my family and a couple of friends, right? And somewhere about 4 to 5 years later, that's in 2016, 2017, I decided to take this leap. Okay. Because it was sufficient exposure that I already had in terms of managing my own money. All right. And there was demand which I was staring at, like, people in my own circle, they were really wanting to explore services which I can provide. All right. And just like any businessman or any entrepreneur would like to jump on an opportunity, I decided that, okay, let's do it. All right. So that's how it started. And before starting this, I did explore a couple of things. Okay. Because I was not very sure whether I want to get into the asset management space immediately. Okay. Because to be honest with you, the asset management space is a one which requires experience. Okay. And it's popularly said in the markets that people who have experience, people who do not have money, they have experience. All right. So as you learn, you end up losing your money, right? So this is one of the mantras, and it's very well known in the market that there is a learning cost attached with equity markets, right? And the success, I would say, the success mantra for anybody who wants to do who wants to make money from the markets is longevity, right? So this is what I was not very sure about, whether I want to get into the asset management space immediately. So I did explore a couple of ventures along with this. Okay. However, there came a time when I had to decide and run only one business. Okay, because it was clearly getting evident that quality is getting compromised on if I keep doing multiple things. And that's when I decided, okay, let's continue with this. Yep.
Sure. So, very interestingly, you have mentioned in your website the journey an investor goes through typically. So there are three stages generally that everyone faces. Stage one is basically when you're just starting. It's all of business luck and overconfidence, and you start making some money. Stage two is when the markets hit a downturn and you actually experience losses. You start panicking, and then there are extreme losses. And stage
Right.
three is when you really introspect, come up with a strategy, earn some modest profits, and then move towards a sustainable level of income. What I have seen is that a lot of investors give up in the first stage, or when they end up in the second stage, very few are able to take that leap from stage two to stage three of introspection. So talk about how you took that leap and how did you went through that phase and came out the other side.
Right. So like I told you, in the first answer, I told you that keeping the learning cost low is very important. Okay. And firstly, acknowledging that there is going to be a learning cost. You do any business or you do any profession, right? There is always a learning cost, whether it is stock markets or it is any other profession, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say we are talking about a researcher, okay? Somebody, let's say, who is working on a research in the field of, let's say, if, is doing research for finding a virus, for finding a vaccine for coronavirus, right? Now, what can go wrong for this researcher is if he doesn't succeed, okay, all he ends up wasting is his time mainly and some resources, some money, he ends up wasting that. And you take any other field, okay, most of the other fields, if you do not succeed, you will end up wasting some of your time. However, what happens in market is, in stock markets is if you get one strategy wrong, you end up wasting a lot of your money, right? So it's very important to realize this, that when you are getting into the deep waters, when you are getting into the ocean, something that is completely new for you, there are bigger sharks who are sitting. Okay. And irrespective of how big you get, you'll always find some bigger shark than you. Okay. So you take any portfolio manager, he's aware that there are bigger sharks than him in the water. Right. So somewhere in 2017, I realized all this, that it's important to keep the learning cost low. Okay. And very conservatively, I started deploying my strategies, right? So I was continuously trying, exploring what works in the market, what doesn't work in the market, right? So that's in 2017 was kind of it was a year where the bull market supported a lot. Okay. And this experience of 2017, the introspection, it helped me in 2018 when the markets really corrected. Okay. So February 2018, the markets corrected, and I was already aware of how do you keep your learning cost low, right? Because of the experience of the last 4 to 5 years. Okay. So that is one part of the answer. The second part is probably it all depends on how much you really desire to achieve success in any field. Okay. Because if you have options in front of you, okay, if you say that, okay, ye nahi, if not this, I'll do something else. Okay. You'll always end up having some, lesser amount of willpower. Okay. But if you have this attitude that do or die, okay, then certainly the way comes out in front of you. Okay. And that's what I would put it. This is not a business of how fast you can make money. Okay. It's often confused by people that if I make money very fast, all right, I'll be successful, but that's not how it is. Okay. It is a business of longevity. Okay. The one who sticks in the field for a longer time, okay, he is most probably going to make money. Okay. So the longer you are there in the field, the higher is the probability that you'll make you'll make the money. Okay. So it's not a T20 game, it's definitely a test cricket game. Okay. At least initially. Okay. Of course, there are periods in the life of any portfolio manager when he has to play the T20 game. Okay. You can't always be playing the test cricket. Okay. However, that the realization that when you need to play the T20 game, okay, it's very important to have. All right. And anybody who comes in initially, he should be playing the test cricket. However, in my case, initially I did play T20. I got lucky. All right. I got lucky in playing that T20 because the bowler who was bowling to me, he was not as good as a batsman that I was, right? Or maybe a bull market supported. All right. So yeah, so that's how I would put it.
Sure. So, Abhineet, can you walk us through your current investment philosophy in a broad way? What are the things you look at before investing? What are the key things you try to look for in a company, or when it comes from an asset allocation perspective?
Right. So yeah, very good question. See, I would classify the entire all the investment opportunities available in the market in a couple of buckets. All right. See, in a market like India, what is imperative to have is growth. Okay, because if the economy is growing at a typical 7-8% rate, and your business is not growing at that even that much, all right, then you are not going to outperform the market, or you are not going to make any meaningful money for yourself, right? So growth is definitely one thing. Okay. Second is, what valuations are you paying for buying that particular company? All right. Because it is often a trade-off. Okay. So if you have to buy growth, if you have to buy a good quality company which is growing at a stable rate, then you have to pay higher, right? So second factor is valuation. The third factor is, who is the man running the show? Okay, because if you end up putting money in a company managed by a poor set of promoters or management, then it's not going to be a very good result at the end of the day, right? So these are the three factors that generally most of the people look at. Okay, now it all depends on what kind of weightage you give to each of the three factors. So number one, I will again repeat. Number one is growth, at what rate the company is growing. Second is the valuation, and the third factor is who are the people running the show, right? On the basis of this, there are various other classifications like growth investing, pure value based investing. Okay, so there are multiple factors, right? And then there is again momentum investing, which has caught up fancy a lot in the last 2 to 3 years, right? So momentum investing, the concept is pretty simple, that you just get into the train when it is moving. Okay, don't wait for it to start moving, right? So that kind of a thing. So there are various ways of analyzing it, or people various ways in which people run the show. Now, particularly in my case, what I have realized is, out of the three factors that I told you, number one is growth, valuation, and promoter. Okay, I have done in-depth study of how much weightage to give to which factor. Okay, and in my experience, how much weightage has to be given to which factor, it depends on what stage of the bull market are you. Okay, so if you start realizing that you are towards the fag end of the bull market, right, then you have to give a lot of weightage to valuations. Okay, and more than valuations, I would say you have to start giving a lot of weightage to who are the people who are running the show. All right, because see, when a bull market is going to end, the promoters or the management, even they have holding in their company, right? So even they would like to cash in. Okay, and I have seen this in many cases, and even I'm sure even you must have observed it a couple of times, that if the promoter decides to exit from your company, the stock price is going to take a hit. All right, so towards the fag end of the bull market, you must give a lot of attention to who are the promoters, and who how much you are paying for the company. Okay, and the third factor should be growth. Okay, whereas if you realize that there is extreme amount of pessimism right now, okay, let's say during COVID, okay, in March 2020, okay, there was extreme pessimism about cyclical stocks. Okay, so steel companies, infrastructure companies, and people were saying that pata nahi kal kya hoga, or what's there in store for us, right? It was extreme fear. I'm sure you remember that, right? So that is the time when you have to start looking for growth. Okay, so what happens is, intuitively the human mind is programmed to think exactly the opposite of what I just said right now. Okay, so when we are towards the upper end of the sine wave, when we are towards the fag end of the bull market, most of us have the tendency of chasing growth, because everything is rosy at that time. Okay, and when we are in pessimism, we tend to get extremely conservative. Okay, however, markets work in an exactly opposite way. Okay, so if I have to put my investment philosophy in a statement, okay, I would say that my stock selection is, it is definitely a function of how good the company is. Okay, but it is more a function of how the market is thinking. Okay, because if the market thinks X and I think that X inverse, okay, and I'm convinced with my logic that X inverse is right, then I would go ahead with X inverse. Okay, so see, this is a ocean, Prabal. This is a very big ocean. Okay, and when you are there in an ocean, you should be aware of what all kind of animals are you surrounded by. Okay, because if you end up on the wrong side of a deadly deadly animal, there is no hope of survival, right? So in my experience, and in the philosophy that I follow, like I told you, it depends on what phase of the market are we in, and it's more a function of how are other people thinking, and then you convince yourself that okay, why your thinking is right.
Got it. So what do I get from it is, at times basically you have to make contrarian bets to what the masses are thinking, if the investment philosophy that you believe in is forcing you to make that contrarian bet. And recently, even I saw your post on LinkedIn, which mentioned that historically, junk stocks have outperformed quality businesses in a bull run. And if your personal portfolio has grown a lot and beaten Nifty by a huge margin, you should be slightly worried. And to which, very interestingly, a person replied that not if you exit at the right time.
Yeah.
So I want to know, what is your opinion on market timing? What would you have said to that person who said that I can catch the moving train and I will leave just before it comes to a halt?
Yeah, so that's yeah. So I'm about to, I was about to reply to that person today. All right, so I'll just share with you. So see, firstly, let us define junk stocks. All right. Now, the definition of junk stocks is pretty huge. Okay, because see, there is a section of the market which says that above, anything below the top 15, 20 stocks are junk. Okay, there are many people you'll meet who say that mid cap में नहीं डालना है, ये सब junk, ये सब फालतू है, आज है कल नहीं है. Okay, and then there are people who say that okay, top 50 companies are okay, the remaining ones are not very good. All right, and then there are people who say that no, I want to play only in small and micro caps. Okay, now for somebody who is playing only in small and micro caps, okay, he is not going to look at the upper end of the spectrum. Okay, then it's very, very important for that person to define what is a junk stock. Okay, now see, one way of analyzing, defining the junk stock is in slightly technical terms. Let's say a company is continuously borrowing funds from the market, okay, and they are not able to generate cash from operations. Okay, then in my terminology, it kind of attains the status of junk stock. All right, because when you're borrowing funds from the market, or when you're diluting your equity and you're raising money, you are not able to generate cash from your operations. Okay, then there are two options available here. Either you're a crook, you're siphoning off the funds. Okay, or you are chasing too much of growth. Okay, now I am not somebody who likes a company who is chasing too much of growth at the expense of repeated negative operating cash flows. Okay, so for me, that company slowly starts moving into the category of junk stock, unless I am convinced that there is something meaningful that people are trying to do in this company. Okay, in that case, I might decide, okay, let's hold on to this, right? So the point is that the definition of junk stock is pretty, it's a big, it's a big spectrum, and you have to firstly define for yourself what is a junk stock. All right, and what is your universe that you want to play, right? So in a bull market, what happens, Prabal, is see, there are a lot of factors that are at play. Okay, the most important factor is liquidity. Okay, because see, bull markets are driven by liquidity. Okay, fundamentals do start coming into the picture once the liquidity subsides. Okay, so today, if you and I, if we have made money in the market, of course it is our effort. Okay, but that effort is only 20 or 30%. Okay, because if you see, stocks which do not have any fundamental base, they have risen more than stocks or companies which are having very good fundamentals, right? So firstly, let us have it clear that whatever money has been made in the last 2 to 3 years, especially after COVID, that is mere liquidity. Okay, now why do junk stocks, or kachra stocks also it is called in the market, why do they rise more than fundamentally good stocks? Okay, see, it's like this. If you have two pieces of metals, okay, one is inferior and the second is superior, it's genuine, let us say. Okay, let us say two pieces, one which looks like gold and one which is actual gold. Okay, if you have to sell the one which is duplicate, or which is not the actual gold, you will have to work a lot on it. You will have to make it look very attractive. Okay, same story holds in the stock market for companies which do not have fundamental base. Okay, if the promoters want to exit it, or let us say the operators want to have a profit from those companies, they have to make it look very attractive. Now, there are two ways of making companies look attractive. Number one is you manipulate the financial statements. Okay, and that's pretty common in India, let me tell you upfront. Okay, number two is you make a bubble in the media. You make a lot of social media analysts talk about your company. You get participation from retail investors. Okay, and then you offload your stock, right? This is precisely the reason why companies which are not fundamentally good, or if we call it junk, okay, they outperform good companies most of the times. This is my experience. Okay, now talking about the comment which the person had made on my post, he says that if you get out in time, okay, this particular statement does not hold true. I agree. Okay, I 100% agree. that if you have to make money, like I told you initially, okay, that sometimes you have to play the T20 game, right? So yes, you will have to put your money in these companies which are not fundamentally good. Okay, now this is, this is one school of thought. Okay, but there is a second school of thought which says that do not move beyond your comfort zone, do not move beyond companies which are fundamentally strong. Okay, however, if you are trying to play the T20 game, like I told you, you will have to focus at some point in time in these companies also. Okay, now when to exit these companies? Okay, see, there are various ways. Okay, there are people who say that, man, I made 30% in a month, what bad is it? Okay, let me exit the company, right? And then there are people who say that 30% is not good enough, I need 3x at least, and then he keeps waiting for his 3x and it goes to a 2x and then it starts coming down and then it never goes up, right? It's a very common story in the markets, right? So various possibilities are there. Now, how do you time it? How do you time it? So in my personal opinion, you cannot time the stocks or you cannot time the market on the basis of percentage returns. Okay, it's worthless to do that, especially if you're playing companies which are not fundamentally strong. Okay, because you cannot value those companies. So if you are aware that there is a company whose financial statements are likely to be fudged, so what is the point in valuing that company? Okay, similarly, if you are playing a company, that it's getting operated, okay, it's getting manipulated, then what technical analysis you will put on it? It is going to be useless. Okay, because if you buy a company at 100 rupees 100 rupees a share, it goes to 200, you feel that I made 2x, but if it keeps getting manipulated, it will go to 1000 rupees. Okay, and then you'll later on you'll repent that, oh, I sold it for 200 and now it's 1000 rupees. It's very common again in the markets. So in my experience, I always reserve the right to be wrong. Okay, but in my experience, what works is timing the sentiment. Okay, so personally, now this is kind of a trade secret which I'm sharing on your show. I see how much interest is there by retail people in a particular company. Okay, and if I know that the company is not fundamentally very strong, or it is fundamentally strong but it is extremely overvalued. Okay, and then suddenly, on the social media, you start monitoring the activity, you feel that on Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn, there's a lot of there's a lot of fondness that people have for that company. It's time to come out of that company. Okay, this is one criteria. Secondly, the moment you see a lot of articles about a particular company in the mainstream media, I'll not name the newspapers and the channels, but you are very well aware of, the viewers are aware of, you will see a lot of activity happening on that company. It's pretty obvious that somebody is trying to offload their stake. It's time for you to come out. Okay, so it's very subjective, Prabal, what we are talking. Okay, and however, if you have to play that T20 game, you need to define the rules for that game, and you need to define for yourself when will you come out of it. Okay, and what I shared just now is my criteria for timing those companies. I don't value them, I can't value them, I can't put any technical analysis on that. Okay, it's completely worthless. So you need some set of criteria on the basis of which you'll exit.
Got it. Got it. And now that you've mentioned about technical analysis, usually what we see in market is that there are two groups of people: one who completely stick to technical analysis and ascribe by its rules and tricks, and the other group who does not believe in technical analysis. They feel you should value companies fundamentally, look at their growth, look at their business model. But you personally have been using a mixture of both, and you even have a popular course called Techno Fundamentals, which you
Yeah.
teach on your website. So I want to know, what is your philosophy and how do you take the best from both of these completely separate worlds?
Right. Good. Again, very good question. See, technical analysis is, it's a science. I wouldn't say that it's completely fake. Okay. However, there's a problem with technical analysis, and that problem is it asks you to keep a stop loss. Okay, because there is no technical analysis without a stop loss and a target, right? Now, what happens, Prabal, is you can't time the sentiment, you can't time the liquidity. Okay, it's worthless to do that. Okay, now I know many people, a couple of my clients who exited the Nifty at 12,000, 12,500. Okay, they said enough is enough, it can't go above this. Okay, and their technical analysis supported that, right? And if you tell people at this point in time that, okay, no, you have to hold on, the liquidity wave is very strong, and the market comes down, then they'll say that, man, I was telling you that I should get out of it. You just said that, okay, you have to hold, and now it is down to 9,000. All right. So the way I look at it is, these are completely two different subjects. Okay. These are completely two different portfolios. So if you are somebody who is trying to make best out of the both worlds, okay, I would say that have two portfolios. Okay. One is a portfolio in which you say that I do not have any regard for technical analysis. Okay. This is a fundamentally good company. I'll hold it. Okay. So even if it trades at price to earnings multiple of, let's say, 150, okay, it trades at a EV to EBITDA of, let's say, 40, 50, 60. You do not have to worry about it. Okay. See, there are okay. So that is one. Now, the second portfolio is where you start doing a mixture of technicals and fundamentals. Okay. See, ignoring fundamentals altogether is going to lead to a disaster at some point in time. Okay. Because if there is a sudden crash in markets, your technical analysis will be of no use because all your stop losses will be hit. Okay. So it is either 100% fundamentals or it is a techno fundamental approach. Okay. In my opinion, personally, I have zero regard for people who are operating on 100% technical analysis. Sorry, I'm being blunt here, but that's my personal opinion. Okay. I do not consider that as something which can generate a huge amount of wealth. Right. Now, which portfolio to focus on, that again depends on what time in the market are you sitting. Okay. Now this fundamentally strong portfolio, let us call it as a core portfolio. Okay. The core portfolio, you cannot time it. All right. And the core portfolio grows steadily. Right. So if you're someone who makes, let's say, 2 lakh 3 lakh rupees a month, okay, you should have some allocation per month from your salary or savings into the core portfolio. Okay. And if you feel that the liquidity wave is going to continue, the momentum is strong, then you do have some allocation towards the techno fundamental portfolio. Right. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely does. And another thing, since you mentioned about P, and it's a ratio that is thrown out a lot when it comes to valuation. And you have written a lot about in your blog as well, which I would urge my
Yeah.
listeners to check out. So I want to know, what is your perspective on using this multiple? Has it become redundant now? Is it too old fashioned? Is it uncomparable? A lot of people say that the nature of business itself has changed, so you can't really compare historical Ps with current P. So is there any use for this tool in an investor's toolkit?
Right. So fantastic question again. Okay. So before I move to this question, let me, since you mentioned the nature of business, I just recalled one point. See, having a techno fundamental approach today is also important because you can't be very rigid about what you think is right. Okay. See, because earlier the business cycle was about 7 to 8 years. Before that, there was a period when the business cycle was 12 years, 13 years. Okay. Now the business cycle is 3 years. Okay. Every 3 years you'll have a boom. Every three years, within that same period, you'll have a bust also. Right. So if you're very hell-bent on your approach, you say that no, what I'm thinking is right. Okay. Then somewhere you are being arrogant. Okay. Somewhere you are being arrogant because the promoters themselves do not know what is ahead in the store for them. How can you as an outsider be so confident that what you're thinking is right? Right. So somewhere for some part of your money, you need to accept that, okay, if it starts moving below this point, this is my stop loss, I'll not continue holding it, especially if the company is not very fundamentally strong. Okay. And it is in a sector which is continuously evolving. Okay. It continuously evolves. So if I have to give you an example, if you're putting your money on e-commerce, all right, all these recent IPOs which are being listed, and you're hell-bent on your approach that no, this is an excellent set of promoters and this is a fantastic business to hold, I'll hold it for 15 years, then you are putting too much at stake, because I'm pretty sure that the promoters themselves of that company are not so confident about their business. So how can you as an outsider be so confident? Right. So that is where technical analysis comes into picture. Now, however, it's nothing, single technical analysis doesn't hold, according to me. It's always a mixture of fundamentals and technicals, right? Now, coming to your second question on the price to earnings ratio, see, this is a very, very subjective kind of a ratio. Okay. Let me give you an example. Price to earnings ratio is, the market price divided by the earnings per share, right? That's a simple definition of price to earnings ratio. The price to earnings ratio is a function of the capital structure of a company. Okay, because if your company is dependent on debt for its working capital requirements, all right, then there is an expense item for interest in the profit and loss statement, right? And that interest, it eats up into the profits of the company. Okay, so the EPS is going to reduce if your company depends on the working capital for having that, for maintaining the operations. Okay, this is one. Second way is, the if the company says that we have a debt free philosophy, we do not want any debt on the balance sheet, right? Then if they have to grow, okay, and they need more cash than what they generate from operations, then the only way for them is to raise money by diluting equity. Okay, again, when you dilute equity, the earnings per share again comes down, because the denominator of your EPS, it increases, right? So that's why the EPS comes down, and that's why your P ratio shoots up. Okay, so first let us get it clear that companies which raise capital, okay, from the external market, their EPS is going to fall, whether it is debt or it is equity. Okay, however, there's a concept of cost of debt and cost of equity. I'm sure you're aware of it, right? You must have studied it, right? So the cost of equity in a country like India is about 15%. Okay, whereas the cost of debt right now, it's about 7-8% kind of cost of debt. So it's very, very evident that if the company is dependent on debt for its operations to a particular extent, okay, it is going to have a lesser, it is paying a lesser cost for the funds. Okay, however, what happens is, please listen to this carefully, in case of debt financing, the impact on the EPS is higher in the shorter term. So the EPS reduces more if the company is more dependent on debt. Okay, whereas in the case of equity financing, the short term impact on EPS is lower. Okay, whereas the longer term impact on EPS is very high if your company dilutes equity. Okay, so if we are looking at a company which is continuously diluting equity, the earnings per share is not going to decrease at a very higher rate. Okay, vis-a-vis if there is a company which is not diluting equity but raising funds from debt, okay, for its growth purpose, okay, the EPS will be reduced significantly higher compared to equity dilution. Okay, now in this case, if you're doing an analysis on price to earnings ratio, you are likely to get misleading results. Okay, because most people ignore the capital structure of the company when they do the analysis for price to earnings. Okay, this is point number one. Point number two is, price to earnings is again subjective, because there is a lot of cyclicality involved in the earnings per share of companies. Okay, so if you're sitting at the top of the cycle where the EPS is high for a cyclical company, classic example is Tata Steel. Okay, every 5-6 years Tata Steel, it gives that cycle because the business itself is cyclical. So if you end up applying price to earnings on a cyclical business, again, you'll be misled. All right. That is point number two. Point number three is, let me give you an example. See, there are inherent strengths of any economy. Okay. And for the Indian economy, the inherent strength is consumption. All right. Now, in my journey since 2012, I have seen many people saying that at price to earnings ratio of 35, Hindustan Unilever is extremely expensive. Okay. Then within 2 to 3 years, that 35 price to earnings becomes 50, 55, 60. Okay. It becomes 70, 75. Then it becomes 100. And then people are fed up. Yaar, ye niche hi nahi aata hai. Okay. Then मैं 100 पे खरीदता हूँ. Right. So it's very subjective, the way in which if you analyze businesses on the basis of price to earnings ratio. Okay, these are 3 points. And there is a very famous person, Chris Meyer. Okay, if you read one of his books, okay, he says that every company which becomes a 100 bagger, okay, most of the time it looks expensive. Okay, on the basis of price to earnings, if you keep valuing that company, you will never get it. You'll always feel that no, it's expensive, right? So like I told you initially, it's always a trade-off between valuation, promoter quality, business quality, or growth. Okay, and if you feel that the phase of the market is right for you to get into particular sort of company, okay, you must get into it. even if you feel that price to earnings is very high, right? And okay, finally, price to earnings has no regard for market sentiment. Okay, because in a bull market, the price to earnings ratios are going to be higher. Okay, but if you feel that no, this is a business which will keep going up, okay, then irrespective of the price to earnings, you must buy it, right? So to put it, to summarize it, I would say that I don't pay a lot of attention to price to earnings ratio. Okay, and again, like I've told you, the retail segment of the market pays a lot of attention to price to earnings ratio, right? And if you end up doing the same thing that most of the common people are doing, you will not end up outperforming the market, right? So like I told you, my philosophy depends on how the market thinks.
Fair enough. That's a very detailed answer, Abhinit. So we have talked about growth aspect, we have talked about valuation aspect. Now we come to the third aspect, which is the promoter or the people running the business. And you have a very interesting catchphrase around it, which is like "Pehle banda fir dhanda." So I want to know what are some practical ways in which we can actually analyze the legitimacy or the corporate governance in a company as an investor.
Right. Right. So let me give you an example. A couple of months back, I was looking at a textile company. All right, and see, for textile, has not been a huge wealth creator, at least in the last 10 years. Okay, so even Bangladesh has kind of overtaken India as far as textile business is concerned. Okay, whereas Bangladesh initially used to be much behind India, right? But recently, the government has started paying a lot of attention to the sector. Okay, now a couple of months back, I was looking at a textile company. Okay, I'll not name it here. Okay, and I was not very sure about where to start, right? Suddenly I saw that it's a 70-year-old company. Okay, and the promoter holds about 75% stake in the company, right? And the promoter is now very actively getting the second generation involved in the business, right? And the second generation has returned to India after having education in the US. Okay, now that's a very important thing for me. Okay, because number one, if the promoter has some ill intentions, okay, he wouldn't have 75% stake despite the business being 70 years old. Okay, so that's a very important qualifier for me, that the promoter is most likely not interested in cashing in the short term. He's not trading his own stocks, right? Number two, if he has some ill intentions about the business, most of the times I've seen that promoters do not get their children involved in the business. Okay, especially when your children have returned to India after studying in the US, right? I have seen ample companies where people, they say that beta tu US se ja, tu pad, yahan kuch nahi rakha hai. And then once the kid is settled there, the promoter, he sells his stock here and he goes there. It's a very common thing in the Indian markets, right? Now this is where I started on that company, and I realized that okay, now there is some point to get into it. Okay, because see, when I'm buying a stock which is worth 3,000-4,000 crore rupees market valuation, okay, I will not put my money on it because it's a fundamentally strong business. Okay, because when it comes to the mid cap and the small cap space, irrespective of how attractive the business is, if the promoter is a crook, you lose your money, right? So this is where I start. I say that okay, there is some point in looking at this particular company. Then I look at the sector. Then I look at the business. Okay, and then I say that okay, there is some substance in this. Okay, so this is the process when it comes to smaller companies, right? Now, one instance I gave you, the example that I gave you. Okay. Secondly, there are various ways, Prabal, of taking the money out of your company. Okay, you need to read the balance sheet, you need to read the cash flow statements, and then you'll be able to understand. Okay, second red flag I can tell you is at least a year back, one of my clients came to me. There was a 100 crore rupees company which was looking very attractive. It was looking very attractive, and they were making electronic items, these earpods, they were making earbuds, they were making, right? And he told me that see, this is looking very good to me, can you analyze it? Okay, it didn't take more than 5 minutes for me to tell him that stay out of it. Okay, because the company had 3 loss making subsidiaries. Okay, and the parent, which is the listed company, was continuously pumping in money in the loss making subsidiaries. Okay. And the subsidiaries, all of them were private limited subsidiaries. Okay. Plus, the auditor of the parent was not auditing the subsidiaries. Okay. The auditor for the subsidiaries was different, and the auditor for the parent, the parent entity was different. In this case, what will happen is the auditor of the parent company says he's a reputed guy. Okay, he's a reputed auditor, but he'll say that I never audited these companies. Whatever the other auditor told me, I took it at face value. So this guy, he's not at fault. Okay. And the other guy, who is not a very reputed guy, he's being managed by the promoters, most probably. Okay. So having 3 loss-making subsidiaries and the parent continuously pumping in money in those subsidiaries is a red flag for me, especially if it's a smaller company. This is second example. Third example, see, promoter analysis, it takes a lot of quality analysis, right? The extent to which I go in doing promoter checks is, I'll just share this with you, and this has got nothing to do with numbers. Okay. So I was analyzing a company, and again, just like I told you, I was looking for a trigger. The textile company that I told you, I got a trigger and then I got into it. I was looking for a promoter based trigger. Okay. And while I was doing that, I came across some YouTube videos where the promoters, those videos were of the promoter's son. Okay. Now again, this guy has studied MBA from outside India. Okay. He's back to India, and when I checked their wedding, when I saw that wedding video, the simplicity of the family, okay, it was very much evident in it. Now again, the business was 50-60 years old. Okay. The family is so simple. It's a 5,000 crore rupees company. Okay. The guy, the child who went outside India for MBA, he's coming back, he's joining the business. Okay. All this is enough for me to start looking into the company from a growth angle or from a business quality angle. Right. So the point is, promoter analysis is very, very qualitative in nature. Okay. Yes, you have to read the cash flow statement, you have to read the balance sheet, right? So I gave you 3 examples, out of which 2 examples I gave you for judging promoter intent is qualitative in nature. The third example of subsidiary is numbers, right? So it's a proper mixture of qualitative as well as quantitative analysis. Okay. And there is no one size fits all approach. Okay. There are various ways of looking at how a company can cheat its shareholders. You have to think of multiple angles. So that's how I'll put it.
Great. So to sum up your investment philosophy, generally people use this spectrum to classify stocks. So at one extreme end, they say there are BARB stocks, which is like buy at any price. In the middle, right, there are some people who believe in GARP, which is growth at a reasonable price stocks. And then on the other end, there is SAP stocks, which is sell at any price stocks. So right, to sum up your investment philosophy, where do you operate on this spectrum and why?
See, there are always some stocks which are BARP for me. Okay. And Hindustan Unilever is one of those stocks. You have to keep buying it at any price. Okay. Because there is a huge competitive advantage the business has generated over a period of last so many years. Right. Now, see, it all depends on how confident you are about your stock picking. Okay. And if you end up doing the BARP philosophy on a wrong stock, you'll be extremely disappointed. Okay. I'll give an example. So now this time I'll name the company. I started telling people that you exit IRCTC while it was 2,500 rupees. Okay. And then it reached about 6,500 rupees. Right. And some people told me that, see, because of you, we lost the opportunity. I said, okay, now just wait. You'll again get the opportunity. Right. And then the entire episode started unfolding. Okay. Now, for some people, IRCTC is a buy at any price stock. For me, it is not. Okay. It's also not a sell at any price stock for me. Let me be clear. If I get IRCTC at a reasonable valuation, I'll enter it. Right. But it's not a buy at any price stock. Okay. It is a growth at reasonable price stock. Okay. So that's how I'll put it. Yeah. So, see, it again depends on what is the sector that you're looking at. Now I'll give an example. It's a very good opportunity for me to give you this example. See, there's a concept of capital cycle. Okay. Let me talk about the cement sector because it's a classic cyclical sector, right? What happens in cement sector is, Prabal, companies, they plan their capacities well in advance. Okay. So if you look at the Indian cement sector, there was a time when the capacity utilization of the cement sector was 40-50%. Okay. And there were a time when it was lesser than that also. Okay. Now, when you're looking at a sector where the capacity utilization is so low, okay, for the next 4 to 5 years, probably there is going to be a lot of competition and there are going to be a lot of price wars. Okay. And the stock prices will not move. Okay. Then suddenly what happens in the cement sector is, okay, the capacity utilizations, they fall to, they increase to about 85-90%. Okay. Now this is a time when the EPS, the earnings per share, is going to go up. Okay. So if you tell me that Ultratech is the buy at any price stock, okay, I would say no. Ultratech is not a buy at any price stock because the capital cycle of the cement sector, it is after all cyclical. Okay, the cement sector is after all cyclical, and there is a huge element of capital cycle in it. So for me, Ultratech is not a buy at any price stock. For me, L&T is not a buy at any price stock, despite the fact that these are great businesses run by great people. Okay, so it is a growth at reasonable price stock for me, both Ultratech and L&T. Okay, but in the case of Hindustan Unilever, what differentiates it, the company is, or most of the FMCG companies, is that, like I told you about the capital cycle, okay, there is a demand cycle. Okay, and when you do an analysis of the capital cycle and demand cycle for FMCG companies, both the cycles are extremely stable. Okay, so the sine wave moves like this. All right, but in the case of FMCG companies, it's kind of a straight, steady, upward sloping line, right? Both the capital cycle and the demand cycle. The reason being, we are such a massive economy of 130-135 crore people, okay, that there is enough appetite for anything that you bring into the economy. Okay. Now you see the way HUL and the likes are moving is, they are moving the premiumization way. Okay. So once the country is growing at 7-8%, the middle class is going to get uplifted. Okay, people are going to aspire for more. Okay, and these companies are going to sell premium products, and then they are going to make more EPS. Okay, so even if their volumes do not grow, even if their volumes grow at a 5-6%, the EPS is most likely going to outperform the economic growth rate, because we are experiencing growth in the lower section of the society. Okay, so if I feel that there is a business which has a stable demand cycle and the capital cycle, then yes, then it is, and plus it is a great set of promoters, then yes, it is a buy at any price stock. But unfortunately, most of the businesses, not just in India, anywhere you see, are cyclical in nature. Okay, now there is a lot of hype going on in the chemical stocks. Okay, I have been out of chemicals for some time. I had some positions in chemicals, but I have been out of chemicals because now I start feeling that I'm not able to visualize where we are in the capital cycle in the chemical sector. So no chemical company today is a buy at any price stock for me. Okay, there are a lot of chemical companies, man, and I can name. There are Deepak Nitrite, there are Aarti Industries. Okay, there people say that these are buy at any price stocks. They are fundamentally very good stocks, but for me they are not, because I can't visualize the capital cycle of the chemical sector. Okay, and I can't say it with confidence that it is a stable cycle like the FMCG sector. So I'm out of it.
Got it. And so recently, as you have already mentioned in some of the answers before, there has been a lot of craze around IPOs, with a lot of IPOs hitting the market, a lot of startups getting listed. So I just want to know, what is your opinion when it comes to IPOs? Is it something that retail investors should consider, or is it just a gamble to get listing gains?
Right. So see, firstly, okay. So let me give you an example. When we had the likes of Infosys and Wipro and HCL Tech, all right. See, there was a section of the market which said that, hey, ये सब bubble है, थोड़ी चलेगा. Okay, ये तो आज है कल नहीं है, right? But look at the wealth IT companies have generated. Okay, and then when the Indian pharma industry was coming up, there was a section of naysayers which said that US वाले थोड़ी खरीदेंगे pharma अपने से. They'll not buy pharma medicine. They'll not buy medicines from us. We'll not be able to give them that quality. But look at what Indian pharma and biotech sector has done for the country, right? IT and pharma are huge earners of forex for the country, right? Now, IPOs that are coming in, okay, again, you have two sections of the market or the society. This is like as usual, okay. One section says that these companies are going to chase growth. They'll bring in more, they'll basically they are growing, okay. And the second sector says, the second section says that no, this growth is going to fade out, okay. And these companies, they'll, there will be a time when they'll get back to their mean, or maybe they'll be zero, whatever, Now, again, there is an element of qualitative analysis in it, okay. If I paint all the IPOs in the same color that is a bakwas, it's going to be unfair, okay. And whereas if I also say that all the IPOs are going to be good, it is again going to be unfair, okay. Because see, IPOs at the end of the day are new entrants in the market, okay. So for me, I have personally been away from IPOs, okay, since the time I started. Initially 1 or 2 years I did it, okay. Then I realized that no, man, this is not something that fits my philosophy, and I'll give you a reason why it doesn't fit my philosophy, okay. See, when I'm having a business which is 50 years, 60 years old, okay, I know how shareholder friendly the promoters are, because I have their annual reports in front of me, I have their con calls in front of me, okay, I have their results in front of me. But if I have a new company in front of me, okay, I don't know how friendly these guys are. Tomorrow there might be a time when they'll not think in the best interest of the minority shareholder, okay. For this reason, I do not really, I'm not very keen on IPOs, okay. However, there are bright spots where companies and sectors are growing, okay, and eventually these companies might become blue chips of the future, okay. See, when it comes to estimating the future, Prabal, what I have realized is the human psychology, we are not able to visualize what will happen, okay. And especially if it is on the positive side, okay. So if somebody tells if somebody says that Paytm is going to be the next HDFC bank, okay, I'm giving a random statement, okay, most of the people will laugh at it. Most of the people will say that kya baat kar raha hai yaar? HDFC bank ka credit standards like, okay. Paytm is not even a bank. They do not even lend. They are just a payment. They are just a payments bank right now. From payments bank, they will go to maybe a small finance bank. From small finance bank, they might go to a universal bank. Okay. However, see, if somebody says that Paytm is going to be the next HDFC bank, I will not buy it at face value, but I will not ridicule that person also, because there is always a possibility of things like this happening, okay. Now when you sense that something like this is going to happen, it depends on your analysis, how much you are able to convince yourself, okay. So if I'm able to convince myself that Paytm has the possibility of becoming a small finance bank and then a universal bank, let's say they get in a big banker, ex-banker as a CEO of their small finance bank, then yes, man, there is some case for evaluating it, okay. But the unfortunate part is that most of the IPOs, 75 to 80% of the IPOs, they will underperform the market after a certain point in time, in 2 to 3 years time. And this I'm not saying just for the sake of saying it. There is enough historical statistical evidence that IPOs, if you sell it on the first day, okay, most of the IPOs will make more money than holding all the companies, and even if 1 or 2 companies become multi-baggers, okay. Now, which IPOs to hold for the longer period? Let me throw some light on that. According to me, see, IPOs is a bull market phenomenon, okay. So in the last 1 or 2 years, I have not even looked at IPOs of biotech companies or chemical companies, okay. I've not even looked at the DRHP, because it's quite clear that if the sector is going through an upcycle and some promoter is bringing his or her IPO, okay, he is going to price it steeply, okay. Now if I invest into an IPO of some such company, okay, I am not going to make huge wealth in the longer term, okay. I might as well make some quick listing gains and come out of it, okay. Whereas if I see a company which is coming out with an IPO, okay, during a time when the sector is not doing well, okay, then it is very clearly evident that this company needs your money. Okay, they really need your money for growth, or they really need your money for working capital requirement. Okay, and such companies could be candidates for holding for the longer term, right? So like I've been saying this, Prabal, the philosophy or my analysis is very qualitative in nature. Okay, I do give importance to numbers. Okay, but for me, first is who is the guy who is interacting or transacting with me. And if I feel that the other party is stronger, the counterparty is stronger than what I am, then you're not going to make money in that transaction, right? So that is what I have on IPOs. It's a very subjective kind of an analysis.
Makes sense. And so now let's talk about some of the things that you have been doing at TechBit. So apart from the two small cases that I already mentioned, you also offer two services under the Fluid IQ and Equinox scheme, which is catered towards creating a customized portfolio and deciding an ideal asset allocation. So a little bit, if you want to talk about it, what is your idea behind it and what kind of services do you offer?
Yeah. So we actually provide a couple of services. Okay, and our services are customizable in nature, right? So see, what we personally like, I what personally believe is, probably as an advisor, okay, you have to be with people through the up cycle and the down cycle, right? Now what happens is, if the cycle is going strong, people are going to praise you that kya advisor hai yaar. But if the cycle turns down, okay, he'll say that she kya advisor hai yaar, mera paisa डूबा hai, right? That is what happens. Okay, so our way of interacting with clients is, we interact a lot, we communicate a lot. Okay, and we convince them to hold the good companies despite what timing or what phase of the market we are in, right? So that is the way we interact. Okay, so this is unlike many advisors in the market actually, where people just come, they give you 10 stocks, and then they say that, okay, this is what you hold for the next 10 years. It doesn't work like that. Okay, we engage a lot with the people that we transact with, or our clients, right? So small cases is definitely one of the products. Okay, however, what happens in small cases, we cannot really give that kind of one-to-one touch. Okay, because at the end of the day, commercials do not support that, right? So for such people, who want to have that kind of interaction, they want to have insights, they want to have conviction. Okay, because without conviction it is nothing, right? So what we do as advisors is, we help people build conviction. All right, and for that we have customizable product where we engage with the client for 5 to 6 hours, and we convince him that this is the right portfolio for you, you should continue holding it. So that's what we do. And as far as what we aspire to grow into is, we aspire to grow into definitely a portfolio management service. Okay, which at the moment we are not eligible to do as per SEBI because of the experience criteria, right? But we are checking out ways and means of how we can get there in the next 2 to 3 years.
Sure, that sounds amazing. So since running your own entrepreneurial venture is very different from working for a company, even if technically you are doing the same thing, that is researching and identifying stocks, it comes up with a lot of risks. So what has been your key learnings from this entrepreneurial venture, which is soon to complete 4 years?
Yeah. Right. So see, for a first generation entrepreneur, things are very, very difficult. Okay, so my learnings are quite quite a lot actually. Okay, but the most important thing which I would say is, keep your learning cost minimum. If you end up spending a lot while you're learning in that entrepreneurship journey, it is going to come and bite back at some point in time. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, have people by your side. Okay, do not be arrogant. Okay, because you'll always need some help from your friends and family. Okay, maintain good relationship with people. Okay, and if somebody is venturing out on the journey, okay, it's always better to consult that, I am thinking so and so, should I go ahead? Okay, and yes, if you speak with 10 people, 8 will say no, you don't do this, you stick with your job. But even if you have 20% of the people who say that, okay, you go ahead, I'm with you, you have enough support to go ahead. Okay, And do plan. My learning says that do plan what will happen in your journey. However, over planning is going to kill it, because the world is moving at a very fast rate. Okay. So if you have 2 years income with you, okay, bare minimum income for the necessities, okay, it's enough for you, because in most of the cases 2 years is a good period of time when you will start making cash flows from your business, provided there is some substance in what you're doing.
Okay. Final question, Abhineet. So,
Yeah.
what is one advice you would have given to your younger self in 2012 who has just started his hands at investing?
Very good question. Lot of things I've advised, actually. Many mistakes I've made over the period of last 8 to 9 years, and I do not regret it. Yes, I do regret it, but there is no point in regretting, because I'm pretty sure that even going ahead, I'll make a lot of mistakes. But like I told you, it's important to be aware that you're going to make mistakes. Okay. Because if you are adamant, if you are in denial that whatever I'm doing henceforth is going to be right, you'll most likely be mistaken. Okay. So I would have advised my younger self that be more receptive to the fact that there is a possibility of you going wrong. Okay. Because everybody makes mistakes. Okay. It all depends on how well you deal with those mistakes, and how much money you lose because of those mistakes when it comes to stock market. So that's what I would say my younger self.
That's great advice, Abhineet. So, thanks a lot for doing this. I think listening to your journey and your investing insights has been a great help, and a lot of people are going to learn a lot from your journey and the kind of insights that you shared. Thanks a lot, Abhineet.
Thank you, Prabal. Thank you for the opportunity and inviting me once again. Thanks a lot.